Hello everyone and welcome to my show. My name is Madam Fulcher. Today is Sunday the 19th of April. It's been a pretty peaceful day here, extremely sunny outside, but just been focusing on learning some new skills, relaxing, and still thinking about the sort of bigger picture sort of stuff, not really looking too much at the headlines today, but certainly reflecting on routine and how one might normally spend one Sunday before this crisis, and possibly how Sunday is spent now. So thinking about that, and also thinking about how adaptability is such an interesting theme right now, and also will continue to be as we sort of move forward towards the bounce back in this scenario. So I had a look at my location history for about a year ago, and I thought, what was I doing on a Sunday? And around about this time, I went on a road trip, and this was something I probably do a few times each year, and it was just to go down to the south coast via Lewis, go for a walk on the downs, see the sea, finish off at Burling Gap and watch the sunset, and then come back up home. And this is something I'd probably do around about this time this year. And typically, this sort of activity, if you scale it up across the country, everybody has certain trips or things they would do on a Sunday or Saturday. They would go to their favourite shopping spot or their favourite park or whatever. And this sort of factors in a kind of economic predictability to what people would be doing, and there are various things, and for example service stations, cafes at Burling Gap along the way, which can sort of predict a certain number of people who come on any given weekend. And obviously in the current scenario, none of that activity is really happening in the way that it could traditionally be predicted. So I had a look at what I did today, and it's obviously a lot more limited. I effectively stayed at home, went for a little walk around a tiny bit of the common near where I live, and I went to the Sainsbury's local. Now that is actually different behaviour, so I've adapted, and I've created a new pattern of economic activity, which, for example, the local Sainsbury's is benefiting from in a way that a year ago it wasn't. Now, plainly, what is happening is that people are adapting to new scenarios, but also businesses are having to adapt to new scenarios. So something I did about a year ago is I went to cheer on a friend who was running in the London Marathon. And again, what you had here is a lot of people raising money for charity, but also quite a lot of economic activity, a lot of cafes, a lot of other events and things that you would traditionally sort of pay to physically be in. Now, during this extraordinary lockdown scenario, what's been really fascinating is watching how some traditional businesses have kind of pivoted and embraced new ways of doing things. And one example is a life drawing session, which someone I know attended in Waterloo. And traditionally, you would pay, you would sit down, and you would draw. And it would be limited by the number of people in that room. Now, since the lockdown, the people behind this event have basically gone digital, and they've created it as an online event. And as a result, they're having 10 times more people signing up and paying to take part in these live drawing sessions. Initially, some were free as a kind of immediate response to the crisis. And then they created some paid events. And what we can see is actually through their adaptability, they've actually massively expanded their business, not just in terms of revenue, but actually just in terms of global reach, because people are signing in all over the world. Whereas before it was just simply people who could turn up in that room in Waterloo and enjoy an illuminating experience developing their art skills. Now, one sort of, obviously a lot of reality now is about getting food in so you can be happy and healthy. So one thing I've done recently is I ordered a food box from a supplier which actually, up until this lockdown scenario, had been supplying food to Italian and French restaurants across London. So previously this company wasn't really an option for someone like me as a home person, as a domestic consumer, but they pivoted very rapidly along with many other companies based at the new Covent Garden fruit and vegetable market. And they quickly adapted their website and their business model to supply these, what they describe as a care package. And there are lots and lots of companies doing this, cafes, pubs, and the wholesale suppliers. And the thing is that, so my old routine has gone, but potentially a new routine has been created. And as we move out of this lockdown scenario, we'll probably look back and think, well, maybe I won't get the vegetables from the supermarket in the way I did before. Maybe because it's a special weekend or because I'm having a party, maybe I'll order in that box. And so a company like this one has effectively expanded their business and created new emotional links and new kind of potential routines. But key to getting to this point was their adaptability. And so we're adapting, but also businesses are having to adapt. And those which are adapting are doing very well. Certainly for ourselves at home, I've been learning new skills. I've been learning this digital platform and video editing and other things. And for a lot of people, will have been learning new skills and taking this opportunity, especially sadly if people have lost their jobs and have a lot more time on their hand. Hopefully their income sorted soon through universal credit if it's necessary. But this is effectively an opportunity to skill up, and this is one of the massive problems in Britain and with our economy, is that people had not always been able to adapt and develop the skills that are needed to get the right kind of income, the right kind of opportunities in the present economy that we have. Now, what some people are describing as the great shutdown, you could also describe as the great upskilling. Now, for a large part, the kind of upskilling I've done has been through 3 online utilities. However, also, there's a massive opportunity here, and for a far-sighted government, certainly one that would, for example, like to create a national education service, could see the lockdown as obviously potentially the beginning of a recession, but also potentially the beginning of a time when you invest massively in the skills and education of your population. Here's the time when, with the right decisions made in government, we could leave this crisis with a much more skilled workforce that are really able to seize on the opportunities of a bounce back which will be phrased around adaptability and new skills and new ways of doing business and forging those connections. Now, I mean, this made me reflect on something which, say about 10 years ago, at the beginning of the austerity era, we had what was described as a defence and security review. And effectively, this was pretty controversial at the time because Britain had to rethink what the big threats were to the country and make some decisions. And one of the decisions at the time was to go ahead with the building of one, and that later became a decision to go ahead with the building of 2 aircraft carriers at the cost of about £6 billion each. The first one is online in this photo, and the second one should be commissioned shortly. Now, at the time, obviously, there was a lot of discussion about what the big threats are to Britain, and there was a kind of broad view that, yes, they were both physical, and they were also kind of cyber. And you kind of, in the cyber world, you think of viruses and you think of attacks. Now, obviously, we're in a scenario where we are effectively under attack by a virus, and effectively our political elite and our politicians, journalists, they effectively use this kind of language of a war against the virus. And certainly in that defence review, there was a mention of digital viruses, but there wasn't actually a mention of the epidemiology and this idea that a kind of a disease potentially which is just created through happenstance, through weird coincidence, through nature, which is where most human diseases come from animals first and then transfer over to humans. But the fact that disease effectively threatening the kind of our economic well-being, our finances, effectively what traditionally a military would defend, the kind of integrity of a nation state. So clearly there's a lot to be said about the sort of role that the armed forces play and whether or not that really is the things that hold society, and whether or not this money is spent wisely on, for example, aircraft carriers. But certainly I think we need to think also about whether or not some of what we would traditionally think is a defence budget might actually be better spent on the kind of preparedness we need for the kind of crisis like this disease crisis and like other kind of crises we will sadly see in this kind of era of climate emergency. So typically the kind of image we have right now is of the UK Army supplying PPE, which is masks and protective wear, to hospitals. And so this is the kind of new reality. And certainly this year, the new government led by Boris Johnson, they were supposed to be holding another defence and security review, and it's just been announced that has been postponed. postponed because obviously there's a bigger crisis to deal with right now. But I would say this is also an opportunity. It's an opportunity to think about adaptability and to think about how we possibly need to think bigger about what defence really is, and think about it more in terms of, if we are going to have a budget like this, maybe this budget should be focused on playing a supporting role to the NHS, playing a supporting role to the social welfare of the society, supplying the infrastructure and other things, because really that would do a lot more to defend our economic and social well-being than having some very large aircraft carriers, which themselves, because of the way they sort of contain and bring people together, are probably quite tricky environments to run safely in a kind of social distancing in the workplace scenario. So I don't have the answers, but I think this is an interesting area to reflect on, to think about how society could be more adaptable, and where politicians, if they were really brave, could be. So my reflections on this, effectively, we need a really strong skills policy right now, and massive investment in upskilling people who've unfortunately found they don't have work, and also a kind of bigger long-term view on where we're investing our precious public funds, and also thinking about how those could be better calibrated to respond to the kind of things that sadly we're going to see more and more of in this age of climate emergency. So anyway, thanks for listening, and hope we'll be back soon with more responses to the kind of big images of the day. And do subscribe if you're enjoying these videos, and do tune in again. Okay, thanks very much. Bye.